Hey folks, it is September the 21st, and today we're going over chapter 25. This is our last chapter over early Christianity. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to go over the next couple of chapters regarding the foundations of Islam. And just as a reminder, I will not be in on Wednesday, so I will have a sub. Because I'll have a sub, I will not have a live stream either. Our senior students at that time, so apologize in advance. So the terms we have on the board is, how did the Western Church become more independent? How about the Eastern Church? Iconoclasm in the year 1054 AD and why that's important. I'm about to give the students here in class a few minutes to discuss this with their partners, and then we're going to begin with today's lecture. So. All right, folks, you got another minute. We're still going over your chapter. Wait, it looks like you're all done. All right, so if you are here in class, go ahead and spend a few minutes discussing with those around you the terms we have up here on the board. So, how did the Western Church become more independent? How about the East? Iconoclasm in the year 1054 AD. There's a couple of things I left out. We're going to discuss them. A lot of this we've already talked about for a bit. So if you have something else from another class, go ahead and put it up and discuss the terms with people around you. So, you can have more than one person. There you go.
I read it. Right.
And you weren't kidding. This is dirty. I made the mark. Yeah, there is. All right. I have some spray. All right, got a couple more minutes, kids.
So we just silly. Next year, we're all going to be office characters, and I'm going to force out a watch. Oh, wow. Right. We can all come as Netflix shows. Okay, we're not this here. I don't understand why I started 3 ends.
I couldn't put on that wasn't I like to be here. Because it could have went straight in my hair. Yeah.
Well, I'll be right here. Those are really pretty lit. I'm not gonna lie.
And it goes away. Where does it go?
Well, look at that. It's a lot.
All right, it's got 1 minute left.
Her handwriting is perfect.
Well, he said he was on school.
What? We only have 2 people that don't.
David lost his red money. So this can be seen.
They were meant to be
That's
part of
when
it.
he cried.
You wish you could be Spider-Man. Actually, I'm perfectly fine. Honestly, you could never be. I don't have that.
I'm pretty good.
I've won.
Pretty good.
Yeah, Pope did some things. Talking about
Economy.
What book were you reading? That's
Hunter.
That says excommunication. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought it said economy, but it said excommunication.
Yes.
You do. You're scary.
So is it like a smiley face, like
necklace under it.
We bought one for
Dollars and dollars.
Yes,
I know.
that's noise.
And it's
$20.
out right
We're
here.
not a fight.
I don't want to keep that, sir.
And stare at
Keep
people
it in
while
the
they do their
office.
work.
We started
It's making me
swinging.
feel uneasy.
Oh, yeah. I was there and I saw, I was telling you.
It's a camera, Richard. It's
Like,
like
no.
Is it raining?
No, it's not.
Hey, all right, kids, so that's the timer.
So,
You're gonna stand in the hallway.
Hey, she took a video.
so let me show you today's images. And then after I show you today's images, we're going to go ahead and we're going to work on the terms today. So this is a big deal. It's been almost 1,000 years, and you still have a division between these two churches. Now in the 60s, they stopped excommunicating one another. So that's good. That's progress, right? They're not, and excommunication isn't condemning a people to hell. That's a misconception. But what it does is excommunication means you're taking somebody out of communion. That means you're no longer allowed to do church services. And if you're no longer allowed to use church services, then the belief is that you're more likely to not get to heaven, if that makes sense. Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's spring.
Yeah, they said it was supposed to start raining at 7, but it didn't quite hit.
Yeah. Isn't it like sunny this morning? The only bright side of my morning. Side of it.
Your poor wretched lie. Poor self-hating Shelby.
That's so true.
You need to stop that. Oh, I didn't open up the right one.
One thing happened.
One
We'll
thing.
get over it. In like 30 years.
Right.
I'm gonna think about that every time I send somebody something.
That's a lot of slides.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Following the recent
they-
presentations.
they've had me teach a lot of classes over the years. So I don't know. I like PowerPoints to help me out. Hey, here we go. Yeah. Okay, I remember now. So one of your terms has to do with iconoclasm, right? So there was a big crisis that had to do with, remember we talked about the Eastern Empire. You had a lot more kind of like, I guess the word for it is like not radical, but a lot more theological discussions and beliefs that went in various directions. So they were a lot less legalistic as a way to think about it. And you're going to have a time where you're going to have something called the iconoclastic movement. In Eastern Orthodoxy, even today, icons are religious works of art that are used for people to teach about stories, say, the Bible or tradition that has to do with Christianity, but also for people to focus their prayers on. They weren't supposed to pray to these as an idol, but some of the Christian thinkers in the Eastern Empire began to believe that people use these as idols. And if you know anything, especially out of the Old Testament from Jewish tradition, is that idolatry or, like worshiping images and statues and stuff like that is forbidden. And so you're going to have a movement sweep through Byzantium where they're going to smash and destroy a lot of these icons. Like here's a picture showing somebody defacing an image of Christ, because and they're not doing it because they dislike Christ. It's actually the reverse. The reason they're doing it is because they want to prevent people from worshiping an image. Because whenever you think about, especially like very non-educated medieval people, they might take things in a very literal sense. So they thought that the peasantry in particular was worshiping images as if the image itself was a god, right? So you're going to have this period where this is going to be done away with. However, the Catholic Church in the West is going to say, this is a horrible thing. What are you doing? You're destroying all your art. You're destroying sacred images that help teach people about Christianity, and they in themselves have certain kind of like spiritual quality to them. So Eventually, though, this is going to fall out of favor even in the Eastern Empire. But it's going to be one of those times where you're going to see the East and the West start to really divide and disagree on things. So this is going to be a period of a lot of like destruction, especially there. See, like they're destroying the faces off that. You're going to see something similar to this happen later on once a lot of these areas are taken over by Islam. Like later on when Constantinople is going to be taken over by the Turks, you're going to have a lot of these murals and icons covered over with tile work and art. And actually now that the Hagia Sophia is now a museum, a lot of that's been taken back, and we can actually see some of the ancient Byzantine paintings underneath that the Muslims have covered over. So 1054, this is when we have the Great Schism, or Schism. I keep forgetting how to say it. So this is where you're going to have the hard set split between the Eastern and the Western Church. And here you see in this map here, the golden part is the Catholic Church. Now it's stronger in some areas than in others. And you see in the West, it goes all the way to Portugal and northern Spain, where you have the last bit remnants of Christian princes. And of course, you have the rest of Europe there, Germany, France, Italy, much of Eastern Europe. Of course, the British Isles going up to Scandinavia. And here for the Byzantine Empire, you have Greece, modern day Turkey. And up north, you see that's where Russia is. And we know that Russia is going to eventually going to become the leader of the Orthodox Church in many ways. A lot of that's going to have to do with because they're going to be the last ones to have the Tsar, whereas especially after Constantinople falls. Let's see, that's for next time. So sad, faceless people. So let's get up to our terms here, and this is what I would need your help for. So I can't use my red marker because this old red marker, I think like the pigment settled, so it's all coming out at once. So it's staining my board. It's really sad. Hey, so who would like to help me with how did the Western Church become more independent? So how did Rome, we've talked about this before, and Kelton. How's this happen? Hey, man.
Hey, how's it going?
Yes.
Roster reconciliations. I need for you to look at that and tell me if you actually take attendance for these people. It doesn't matter if they're present today or absent. Can't do it in my term.
Okay.
Just check, sign, date, circle your total.
And it doesn't matter if you're here today or not, right?
But if that's who you normally take attendance for,
Now, Destiny told me she's going to do online now.
well, I didn't hear that. And so
Yeah.
she's still in your normal, I take attendance for her.
Yeah, I've been marking her as absent. She's sending an email. I think I might have to tell her that.
And then she's going to need to join that Google Classroom with Ms. Moore's
Okay.
date. Write your totals and circle it.
Ah,
I know, I'm sorry, it's complicated.
it's too many instructions for me.
Me too. Perfect.
All right, good. Just
Thank
making
you.
sure.
I appreciate it.
No problem. Hey, wait. How did they become more independent?
They killed everyone else.
No, Hunter, they didn't kill everyone else.
Sounds like a Roman thing to do.
Well, it is, but we're not saying that people weren't killed, but that's not what we're talking about here. So, what political thing did the Pope do to align themselves with people in Europe instead of Constantinople? Do you remember, like the year 800? You remember who was crowned on Christmas Day? Charlemagne, right? So that's going to be the big one. So yeah, Charlie the Great. So 800. Remember Christmas Day. That's one of those dates I'd like you to remember. The Pope crown Charlemagne. We've talked about this before. Y'all got to remember this one. It's going to be one of those important ones. If we have a final exam, which we might, I've made my mind up yet. So crown Charlemagne, aligning Catholics with Germanic princes. And this makes sense. They're right there. If you recall, Constantinople couldn't provide any protection. That's what a government is supposed to do. Ancient people understand this. Modern people don't understand this. The basic thing that a government's supposed to do is to provide protection. Now, protection for what? That's where you can have some societies kind of disagree. It can be liberty, it can be property, it can be things like that. Then you got the modern idea of rights. Rights are different from liberty, though, so don't get them confused. We'll talk more about that later. So this is a big one. They become separate because of geography. They don't have cars and cell phones. So they have to make friends with the people near them. So they pick the ones that are least crazy and most likely to help them. And they say, hey, you're now the emperor. Please protect us. And it worked. It kept them relatively safe. So they're going to become separate because of that. But also, don't forget, earlier we talked about the papal arguments for things such as the Pope is inheriting from Peter and Paul his position all the way down. So it's like if they were the first top apostles, I'm the top archbishop. Also, like they said, Rome has always traditionally been the capital, so we're still in charge. Now, the Eastern ones, the Eastern Church had its own argument. So what argument did we make for the Eastern Church being more independent from the Western Church? So, Shelby, what do you remember? Yes.
I have no idea.
Okay. Okay. Think about this. We talked about there was more archbishops than just in Rome and Byzantium. Wasn't there also big, remember that's think of them like preacher princes, right? I guess is the way to put it. It's easy for me to think about it because I'm Catholic, but I mean, I didn't grow up that way. So I know it's kind of like one of those things people don't normally think about bishops. So think about it as like a preacher who's in charge of all these other preachers, right? So super rich too, usually. So you had one in Rome, you had one in Constantinople, you had one in Egypt, you had one in Syria and Antioch, which 3 of them are going to kind of get pushed under and not be powerful. Do you know why?
Idolatry?
Because of what?
Idolatry?
Well, that's going to be one of the things that's going to help separate them, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. When we talk about that's going to be the argument for iconoclasm, which means icon, image, klasm, destruction. So it's Greek words for icon, destruction. So, but here's the deal. Why did those 3 other patriarchs or archbishops or whatever, what weakened them? According to your readings, it's at the end of it, kind of. They were weakened by a new religion, Islam. Yeah. So, and remember those places I talked about, Syria, Antioch, or is it? Yeah, in Alexandria or Egypt. They were also in the east, but now they're going to be weakened. So if they're weakened, I mean, they're kind of left as the top dog in Christianity around there. Now you also have pockets of Arianism and stuff like that. When we talk about Islam, there's also going to be a period of persecution we'll talk about later. So the only leading patriarch in the East after the rise of Islam. And Islam is going to spread very quickly in what was previously Christian and Jewish territory. We want to talk about some of that. Some of it through violence, some of it through nonviolence, right? But we see that happens a lot anyway. So that's one thing. And your book did talk about like the Nicene Creed, how they had like remember a creed comes from the Latin word creo, like I believe, right? And so it's a statement of belief. It's like these are the things we believe in our church. And if you're going to be a member of the church, you have to believe in this list of things. Well, they had a disagreement in the creed regarding like the Trinity, right? Like the filioque. And filioque, filio, like philia or filius, which is son, and K is a prefix or a suffix you add to mean and. So it means and the son. So if you're saying the creed, like in Latin, you go like filioque, like paterque. I don't know the creed in Latin. But so they have theological differences with the West. So that's really what you need to know there. So belief differences. When churches have different beliefs in like the nature of God, it's hard for them to stay together, right? Because, it's really big. So theological differences, you don't have to know what the differences are. Who did they say was actually kind of like the leader of the government? Who did the people in Constantinople say was the leader of the government? No, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. The church. You remember Justinian? What was he?
The emperor.
The emperor, yeah. So theological differences said the leader of empire was their emperor. Did they believe the Pope was the head of the church? No, they said, no way, Jose. They said the patriarchs were equal. And eventually they're going to say the patriarch of Constantinople is going to be the head guy of all of Christianity. So you got two guys saying they're in charge. So that's another disagreement. So you have disagreements on leadership, theology. You're also going to have differences here too. The Roman Church is going to be signified by the vestiges of Roman culture and also the Latin language. In the East, it's going to be the Greek language and Greek culture. As they spend time away from one another after the fall of the empire, the Romans are going to forget how to read and speak Greek. So much to the point that it like later on in the Renaissance, they're going to have to import teachers in to teach them how to speak Greek again. So they're going to eventually hit a point where communication is going to be very, very difficult. So the separation is just going on and on. You didn't have much of a separation when you had this big, powerful empire with a lot of trade and information being going on, right? But now you can't have that because there's a breakdown in society. Traveling at this time period was very dangerous. The roads weren't safe. The ocean wasn't safe. Trade was a very risky thing. These people weren't unified anymore into one government. They distrusted one another. So, yeah, the separation. I mean, once you don't talk to somebody for a while, it's kind of like that with like relationships. If somebody has a relationship and you don't talk, you dislike one another more and more. So keep that in mind, right? You can go for siblings too. So, iconoclasm. So, what does this word mean again?
The destruction of images.
Yeah, destruction of images. So, started in the East. When I say the East, I mean Byzantium. Let's see, destruction of religious icons, which I'm probably going to spell again. Called idolatry. Who didn't like this? Who didn't like iconoclasm? Hey, Ariel. Who didn't like iconoclasm?
Everyone.
Not everyone. Maybe everyone in a direction. Maybe the church and did you read? Why didn't you read in my class? You too busy doing Ms. Martinez's work. I didn't take notes. You needed to just stay them. So, who else? Hey, what you got?
The people who don't like the icon, it's all iconoclast.
Yes. But who are the people who thought that this was a bad idea?
Iconophiles.
Yeah, iconophiles. And a lot of those iconophiles were actually found in Rome. So the Roman church condemned this practice. So the reason we signify this is going to be another one of those times where we're seeing like differences. And this is a big difference because the reason why do we talk about religion in this class, in a history class?
You know, like people were thinking about other things.
And back then, this was to a lot of people. This and to a lot of people now, it's everything. But to a whole lot of people back then, this was everything. Religion had to do with everything regarding your art, your pastimes, all of your holidays. Things you did every day had religious significance. I mean, religion is very important, very, very important. So, that's why we talk about it. And we're seeing how the major religion in this period is being split in half. And it's corresponding with the split in half of the Roman Empire further and further after its, demise already, basically. All right, so last one. So, what happened in 1054 AD?
Pope Leo sent his legates to Constantinople,
Yeah, why did he do that?
refusing to accept, I don't know that first name, someone Michael's title of something.
Yeah, so the Pope sent envoys basically to Constantinople demanding recognition for being the head of what they call the church on earth. So the thing is, the Patriarch of Constantinople said he was the head. And so they're going to have this disagreement. And what are both sides going to do to each other? They're going to lay down a law, kind of a law. I mean, it's kind of a legalistic thing. Both sides, it's an EX word. Yeah, and so a bull is like a legal statement from like a pope, right? Like if there's a papal bull, it's supposed to have like the power of church law. And so it's kind of weird for a modern person to think of. So both sides are going to excommunicate each other. And so what that essentially means is you're no longer allowed to do church practices. And so later on, we're going to talk a little bit about, like they had this idea of sacraments, right? So you had like sacraments of like, what people call it last rites. That's where people would get blessed before they died. It's a sacrament of like confession to try to expiate their sins. Communion, they go up and they have like, bread and wine, those things. So if you can't participate in those things, the belief was you're less likely to make it to heaven because you're still carrying like the stain of sins and things like that. So they're both cutting each other off from the community. And this is going to be this way till the 1960s. And then finally both sides are going to call it off. Now there's still not one church, but I think it's kind of like one of those things where kind of getting there. So, but remember, when you're looking at this, a lot of the things like the idea of toleration and stuff like that, that's a modern concept. If you said toleration to an ancient person, it comes from the Latin word tollare. It means to bear, like to bear a burden. So if you're tolerating somebody, it doesn't mean that toleration is something that's supposed to make you happy. It means you're carrying their weight, but you're not destroying them. You're just carrying their weight. So you're kind of dealing with something you don't necessarily like. This division is going to become even more significant during the Crusades. We're going to see later on in the Crusades, the Eastern Emperor is going to ask for help from the West, but it's not going to go necessarily in a way that he wants it to. So you're going to have rather successful First Crusade, but at the same time, Constantinople is not going to be a winner out of that. So, and a lot of that has to do with this division that's still going to be around. Let me go ahead and take a picture of this. Yeah, so when we come back tomorrow, we're going to talk about the next two chapters that have to do with, we're going to talk about Bedouin people, which, Bedouins are kind of like native North African and Arabic people. So it's like Middle Eastern, right? They're usually tribal, usually nomadic. So we're going to talk about them, and then we're going to talk a bit about the early life of Muhammad. And then after I come back from being given the SAT on Wednesday, we're going to come back on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about like the pillars of Islam and stuff like that. Because when we're talking about Western civilization, especially this period of the Middle Ages or late antiquity, yes, Europeans called themselves Christendom. They didn't call themselves Europeans. They said we live in Christendom. But they're going to be deeply impacted by Islam, because we're going to see that it's going to shape Spain. It's going to shape a lot of Italy too, as a matter of fact. And I mean, it's going to lead to the Crusades, and then that's going to go on for a long time. The Reconquista, which is also a crusade, is going to shape how Spain reacts to their discovery of America when they come to South America. They're going to treat Mexico and South America as a Reconquista, as a crusade in a major sense. So there you go. So we're going to end off our lecture for today. We're going to come back tomorrow. So please make sure you read chapters 26 and 25.